Hello, everybody. So, I want to just have a quick little review. Has Donald Trump done what he promised to do and ended the war in Ukraine in 24 hours? Simple answer, a lot of people have noticed, is no. It has been more than 24 hours and it's still going on. But is it fair for us to criticize him for not ending it in 24 hours? And the first thing I want to note, so Trump, he did say that at one point. He even said things like, I was going to end it before he started. It's going to happen on 24 hours after his inauguration, even before, blah, 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 blah. It's been 2 months and a week, a bit over 2 weeks, 2 months, and the war's still going. So, can we say that it's not fair? Well, the first thing to note, there's probably two big things to note. Number one is that Joe Biden deliberately put in place things to thwart this before he left office. And there are other groups that did it as well, but mainly Joe Biden. And number two, Ukraine and Russia still also have to agree. But what we can say is that Trump has met with them and has formulated peace plans that have had more progress than we had in the whole time of Joe Biden in charge. And so we can say, all right, he's tried, he's made more progress. Now, then some people have criticized and said, well, it's not fair that Trump has favored Russia. And I just want to address this in other videos as well. So when you get to a negotiating stage, you look at what you can leverage. And the fact is, Russia are already on maximum sanctions. So as far as penalty, you can't really go any further. I mean, there might be some tiny little thing, but there's nothing substantial. Now, had Russia not had any sanctions and this was going on, then yeah, you could have threatened sanctions. Um, but you can't really at this stage offer any more what they'd call a stick. So all that's left for Russia now, I suppose you could offer more of a stick because USA could invade Russia. USA could put troops into Ukraine, and also USA could nuke Russia or Russian positions in Ukraine. So that part of the stick still remains. But the other side of things is that he can offer what they call a carrot, and that's what he can offer for Russia. So, for example, at the moment, Russia has a number of lands that they hold, and they have some people are describing them as annexations. Now, I don't want to say they are annexations because the different people have different views of what an annexation is. An annexation is usually where one country and another country, they would have had a war, but one country is so much bigger than the other, so much more powerful that the other country says, okay, look, we'll just have it. It's not always a nasty thing. You've got to realize that as part of World War II, Germany annexed Austria-Hungary and they became part of Germany and they were allies. So it wasn't really negative in that case. And if you look through annexations throughout history, they're not usually really nasty affairs. It's not usually the kind of thing which is just horrible. Now, if you look at the case of Crimea, Crimea never asked to be part of Ukraine. They tolerated it. But so their annexation wasn't Russia's idea, it was Crimea's. So I know a lot of people have said, well, it's an illegal annexation. Well, it wasn't. In the case of the other ones, they happened mid-war, and we need to separate them. And in fact, the Donbass wanted to be independent, and then they really change their mind from independence to wanting to be part of Russia? Not sure. That's a bit debatable. And those two, so Donetsk and Luhansk, have to be in a different category to Crimea. And then the other two, which are Zaporizhzhia and Kherson, didn't express any desire to be part of Russia or to be independent before 2022. Not certainly not any major idea. And in fact, Russia don't hold very much of those two oblasts. To explain what an oblast is, I mean, in Russia, then they have republic, then they have oblast. But in Ukraine, because Ukraine was a republic, they just go straight to oblast. So you can think of it sort of like a state, but not really, because it's a bit layered. And in fact, when you had USSR, you'd have USSR, Russia, republic, and then oblast. So calling it a straight out state, probably not quite accurate. And then, of course, you have the Warsaw Pact. You have USSR, part of the Warsaw Pact. But I digress. So basically, you can call a region, a province, a state. As far as Ukraine are concerned, they just go Ukrainian Oblast. But it is a little bit more complicated than systems in or situations in other countries. But the thing is that these annexations, as people have described them, they did come after a referendum. Now, you don't need to have a referendum to have an annexation. You just need to have the leaders of that country agree or that region agree. You don't need to have a referendum. So they had a referendum, which is more than you'd usually get. And the referendum, now some people said that it wasn't very fair, and they're saying that for all of those reasons. So all the five, which I think we can categorise into three different areas. So Crimea, I don't think there's any doubt that that was legitimate, but people were saying that it wasn't. I mean, Crimea historically want to be part of Russia. Now there is an independent movement in Crimea. Anyway, there's a Tatar independent movement, but other than that, like if you talk to Crimeans, you say, well, what would you like to be? There'd be some people that say, well, we want to be an independent republic, want to form our own country. Some people would say, oh, we want to be part of Russia. Nobody in that region wants to be part of Ukraine, or very few. So, given you three options, Russia, independence, Crimea, they're all going to say Russia, almost all. A few will say independent. You're going to have like tiny amounts that are going to say Ukraine. So that I think we can say quite clearly that one was legitimate. That and I think any peace deal has to acknowledge that Crimea is Russian. So if you say anything other than that, you're not being fair. And Crimeans, if Crimea were forced to go back to Ukraine, they would protest. You could take Russia away, but the Crimean people are going to protest that. So that can't happen. So any peace deal has to give Crimea to Russia. That's a starting point. Then you have the Donbass. Now you could argue, okay, well, have to go to Russia. They wanted to be independent, and they asked Russia to come in, the DPR and the LPR. But realistically, you have to give that to Russia. And again, remember that Russia has this leverage, and because they're winning the war, they've got nothing to lose. There's nothing. They can't offer any negatives. I think the thing is that what Russia doesn't have right now is that those areas are not officially recognised by USA or any other country. So what USA can offer is to say, all right, we're going to offer you that we will officially recognise as the USA Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk officially regarded as being part of Russia. Now that is something they can offer. That's a carrot, right? And that would be the minimum that they can offer. Now they can go further than that and say, well, we're going to also say that we're going to officially recognise Zaporizhzhia and Kherson, I might be mispronouncing these, as being part of Russia. And that would be more because, yeah, Russia says, oh, well, they're part of our constitution. But having that international recognition is more than what they've got now because they don't currently have that. So that's a carrot. That's a little carrot that Trump can offer. And I think that would be a carrot that Russia would be happy with. And I reckon that Trump says, all right, we'll do it. Now, I'd said previously that you could have USA um, overseeing some free and fair voting in those regions. It doesn't look like they're going that way. I thought they would. I thought that would be a good move, and I would have also added some other areas such as Odessa and other areas that are very, very pro-Russia and would love to be part of Russia. And in fact, there's a little corridor from Crimea through to Odessa that I think they could have offered them to Russia as long as there's voting. And I think that that voting could have helped Trump's position of saying, well, there were unfair voting, I was ripped off, all that sort of stuff. So I don't know what he's going to do there, but that's the thing. Now, what can he offer to Ukraine as for what's the carrot? I don't think he needs to have a carrot. So diplomatically, he doesn't need to have a carrot for Ukraine. He can offer punishment, which is he could withdraw support. Now, if the support's withdrawn, and a lot of people in Europe have said, "Well, we're supporting them all just as much." Now, yeah, Europe has been supporting a little bit, and there's different figures around, and some people will say, well, Europe's been supporting more than USA. That's not the figures I have, but look, it is close, and I suppose there's a way to argue that. Could Ukraine keep going if if the rest of Europe doubled the amount? And I think they could. And could Europe do that? Yeah, I think Europe could pump up the amount that they offer, and they could give that support to Ukraine, and it could keep going for 5 years even. And there's also talk about European putting personnel in there. And now there are army members, military from some of these other countries, and they could put them into Ukraine, and that would make a big difference because Ukraine are losing soldiers, and of course they already are in a situation where they don't have very many people in the younger generation. So um, most of their soldiers are a fair bit older than people in, for example, Russia, and so they would love to have people from other countries come in and, bring in 50,000 troops. The problem is for Ukraine is that they are at a conscript level. So they're actually forcing people to join the military. And you're never going to conscript troops from, for example, France. If France sends any troops, it'll be their normal army, which is much smaller than Ukraine's normal army plus conscripts. You've got to realise when you're a defender, you get ordinary people come along and that's what they do. But France is never going to do that. They're never going to have a conscript when it's not actually threatening them. And even if the whole of Ukraine was taken, it still wouldn't threaten France. Now it might threaten Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. Um, but I think that Poland has recognised that they're not going to be invaded out of this. And if you look at the way that the dialogue has continued, it's more likely that Russia will reach a peace deal with Poland, in which Russia offer Poland part of Ukraine. Now, that's more likely than a Russian invasion of Poland, and I think we've got to accept that. Now, Poland might say no, but I think that Russia are pushing towards that. They've even suggested that Poland want part of Ukraine. Poland have previously held parts of Ukraine. And as far as Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, I think at this stage, there's no threat to them. It's not to say that there never will be, but um, I mean, Lithuania historically hates Russia. Latvia and Estonia probably don't like them all that much either. So I think more likely Russia would reach a bit of a peace deal with them as well. And then we have Hungary already moving towards a peace deal with Russia. And Germany, I think realistically, Germany would prefer to have been on Russia's side or at least neutral in this war, but were forced into opposing Russia by USA. And so when you look at that, you're looking at different European countries having different views of it. And I think that you'll find that if they want to have a European wide support, they're going to struggle. A lot of the reason that they were supporting as much as they were was because USA essentially forced them to. And USA are powerful enough to do that, and they use NATO to do that because NATO is essentially USA's promise to protect Europe. So NATO is not Europe. NATO is USA protecting Europe from Russia. So if you don't have USA part of NATO, well, it's just the European Union. That's what it becomes, and it's not even quite the European Union. And bits of Europe historically fought against each other, every which way, and they don't really have the same views as each other. There might be some that would want to support Ukraine, and I'd say from what we've seen, the United Kingdom will, and I think that France probably would, and then there's countries like Belgium. But whether that's enough to get Ukraine over the line, I think that's very unlikely. I think it might slow down Russia's push compared to having no funding at all. But I think you'll probably find that those countries will probably lower the amount that they support. They'll still support a bit. And I think that'll just delay the inevitable. So if USA cut the funding completely, and they've already announced a freeze on it at the moment, if they cut it completely, I think you'd find that Ukraine will simply lose in the normal way. within probably a year. So, what incentive does Russia have to accept any peace deal, given that? Well, so USA can say, well, we're either going to give arms to Ukraine and delay the inevitable, or we're not going to give it to them. So if USA keeps supporting Ukraine, then that means that Russia can't win. They can't lose either, but keeps fighting. So that's the main thing that USA has, is whether or not to keep it funding it, lessen the funding, or to remove it. So that's what they're fighting for. And in order for Russia to agree to a peace deal, they're not going to accept anything that doesn't include those five oblasts. And I think realistically, considering the real leverage and how far Russia is likely to go, considering under Trump, there is pressure to at least minimize the amount of support for Ukraine. I think that Russia would want those five oblasts officially recognized by USA, with also USA putting as much pressure as possible on their allies to also recognize them. Now, which countries will agree to it? Again, I think that will depend on the country. I think that we can probably realistically get Hungary, have already said along those lines. I think we can realistically get Hungary to support that. And I think that we can get Germany. Now, it might not go beyond Germany and Hungary at this stage, but I think that those, if we had those two countries officially support it, and of course Russia will get North Korea to do it, China will officially support it, and even if it's just those five or six countries, and there's not every country, then if they're recognizing that that's a different border, and we could have two different sets of maps depending on which country it is, that's still going to be a bit of a carrot for Russia. And there might well be the United Nations says, no, it's not. But, and also I think you've got to realise, yes, United Kingdom really do hate Russia, but uh, you also have the United Kingdom really, really love USA at the moment, and they have done for quite a while because they see USA as a way to get back into some power. And so there will be a negotiating stage where USA contact United Kingdom and say to them, look, if you want us to stay as your friend, you're going to recognize these oblasts as being a part of Russia. And I think United Kingdom would agree with that. Now, they might say they're not going to, but I think ultimately they will go along with that. And once you have the United Kingdom on board, I think all other opposition will fall apart, and you'll find a lot of countries will recognize them as part of Russia. So, is it fair for USA and for Trump to give Ukraine to Russia? I don't think they're ever going to give the whole of Ukraine. They're going to give the parts of Ukraine that like Russia, that are happy to be under Russian control. And the alternative, of course, is that they have a different leadership system in Ukraine, one that represents the whole of Ukraine. So we've got to recognise that Ukraine have banned and restricted a lot of different parties, a lot of different politicians, and these are not minor politicians that nobody cares about, not like Navalny in Russia. And I know Navalny was in prison and eventually died, but he was also was never going to be president of Russia. He's had a very small popularity, and the people that Ukraine have arrested and imprisoned and removed entire parties for were the people that were presidents before Maidan, so or Maidan or however you say it. They were the people before the 2014 Maidan Revolution, Revolution of Dignity, whatever you want to call it, and their whole parties are off. That you're not allowed to vote for them, so you can't vote for what was the main party. And I've explained this previously. It's a bit like how in Australia we have two main parties. That's Liberal and Labor. Let's say that somebody went in there and said, "Well, we're going to ban both Liberal and Labor." Well, let's say in America they banned both Republicans and Democrats, and the only people you were allowed to vote for was some extremist party that you've never heard of. I mean, that's the situation in Ukraine. So, in order for Ukraine to be free and fair, they have to be allowed to vote for whoever they want to. And banning of political parties is really a very it's unusual or it's unlikely to be fair. And the way that they did it in Ukraine has not been fair. We also note that, of course, Ukraine's leader has refused to hold an election. I believe it was June last year. And that's an issue too. Now, explain the war, but we have had people hold elections during war. And they said, oh, but it's part of the Constitution. Well, they changed the Constitution to make that. So that doesn't change the thing. They changed the Constitution to mean that Crimea can't leave. Ha ha, bad luck, Crimea. Um, these things can be changed back. Uh, yes, you might have to have a referendum to change it and all that sort of stuff, or you could just say, look, we're taking it, bad luck. Your Constitution is unfair. And that's the thing is, you can't just bandy around things that you put in place yourself and say, well, this doesn't allow me. Bad luck. So, yeah, so I think that, I mean, USA Russia, would they take the whole of Ukraine? I don't think so. I don't think that's what they want. And there's also things like, oh, get rid of the Nazis. And I think that Trump might go for that. Um, there are some neo-Nazis in America, or Ku Klux Klan and the like, who do support Trump. I don't think Trump wants to recognise them, and he's also very much against Israel. And I actually see, there is quite a lot of support between Russia and Israel, and a lot of that is along the lines of the Nazis. And I think that Israel would support getting rid of the Nazis from Ukraine. And this is not just individuals; we're talking about laws. We're talking about whole groups of people that are in important positions. So this is different to, let's say, Germany. And Germany still has quite a lot of neo-Nazis. They probably have more than any other country, even now. Germany has laws that oppress the Nazis. Ukraine has laws that celebrate them. Now, we had an issue with Greece not long ago where there were Nazi parties that were trying to form government, and that got shut down pretty quickly. But, it's obviously, there's a difference between individuals being Nazis, which is not great, and it being accepted and tolerated in the country. And the acceptance and tolerance of Nazis in Ukraine is higher than any other country. So um, I think, we've got the thing in the United Nations where there's Russia passed a resolution or they presented a resolution and they said, we want to abhor Nazism. And Ukraine said, we don't abhor Nazism. And then USA joined them. And then other countries joined them because USA told them to. So yeah, that's a big issue, and I think that there will be that. And I mean, Russia's made a big deal of NATO. I think Russia's being ridiculous about NATO. I don't think NATO's relevant, but not having Ukraine in NATO, if that's a big deal for them, well, say no to it. It's pretty easy. USA can do that. Trump can do that. Trump has the authority to do that. So he just say, well, I'm going to sign a rule saying I will never support it, and you have to have unilateral support. So that's it. Simple. They can never join NATO. And I mean, they can join the European Union, which, if USA leaves NATO, that's pretty much what NATO will become. So there'll be no need to have NATO. They'll just make European Union into a military alliance. And although I doubt that they would all unify, because Europeans, they're very complicated. They're not just all the same. They have different views. So you probably find two or three different alliances within Europe. But yeah, I mean, NATO's been completely pointless since Soviet Union fell apart. But they've kept adding to it since then, which is completely ridiculous. They should have disbanded it in 1991. NATO should have disbanded in 1991, and I mean, everybody knows that. It was when it was formed, it was, it was a alliance against the Warsaw Pact, and that was the Cold War. Was NATO versus the Warsaw Pact? The Cold War ended in 1991. NATO didn't disband. Not only did they not disband, but they added members. And that's solely to intimidate and bully Russia. And this isn't a defensive alliance. This is an aggressive alliance. And it has been since 1991. It was, before 1991, it was defensive. Of course it was. But yeah, NATO needs to be disbanded. Not that they can't have some other military alliance, but I think it needs to be a military alliance that's mutual interest. I mean, BRICS is there, so they need some opposition to BRICS, but NATO is not in opposition to BRICS. You need to have something which is based on what people actually want, not what they feel forced to do. So yeah, NATO is a remnant of the past and it needs to disappear. Um, we don't want to get NATO turned into United Nations where every country on earth joins it, or every country but Russia and China. I mean, what's that going to do? It's going to force Russia and China to invade them all together in a big world war. So that's not a good idea. That's not a good move, and that's not what we need them to do. So yeah, I definitely see NATO disbanding. I wouldn't just say no more Ukraine in NATO. I'd say, you know, USA can just leave NATO, and then if Ukraine joins NATO, NATO's a bit useless anyway without USA. So I think that that's probably a better solution. But I mean, maybe they're not there yet. Maybe they just need to say, all right, well, we'll just ban Ukraine. And then I really don't see it being that big an issue because Ukraine might say no. But if Ukraine says no, USA just says, well, go ahead and defeat them. So I think that we are heading towards peace. And I think, in conclusion, I think that Trump is doing a pretty good job. Now, there was an intelligence leak. I didn't pay much attention to that. I don't really care. Um, the, we're not we're not at this stage where there's secrets flying around. We're more at the stage where we're negotiating, and it's not going to be a frozen conflict. It's not going to be a ceasefire. This is going to be a terms of surrender for Ukraine, and that's the only way to go ahead with it. If it's a frozen conflict, Russia will lose. Russia will never agree to a frozen conflict. If it's a ceasefire, Russia will lose because they'll just shore up their defences. Russia's never going to agree with that. If any other country puts troops into Ukraine, Russia's never going to agree to that. Um, so yeah, look, I don't see a lot of sticks that Russia will fall victim to. They have all the leverage. They're going to get carrots. They're going to get more than what they have right now. They've already annexed those oblasts. I think that it's likely they'll end up annexing Odessa and have a stream from Odessa to Crimea. I think that's Kharkiv. I have to look at my map. Um, but yeah, there could be 8 or 10 oblasts that Russia end up controlling, which would be about a third of Ukraine under the current borders. And I think you could find that the eventual deal will have something along those lines. And I know that some people have talked about war reparations. Russia's not going to pay them. Russia will try to rebuild the areas that end up being part of Russia, and that is what they'll do. They want them to be a part of Russia, they will rebuild them. And I think if there's going to be war reparations, it will be from USA to Russia. I don't think that's going to happen either. I think there'll be a deal that USA will say, well, Russia, you're not going to seek war reparations from us. There's no point seeking war reparations from Ukraine. They will never be able to afford it. And I think they'll work out a way to make Ukraine functional. And that's going to be a bit complicated because Ukraine are not a rich country and they've been overspending, well, not just since their independence, but even before that. They've had far too big a population for the amount of money that they're generating, the amount of income and resources, and it's basically 5 times the population that they can afford. So, and even with this war, it's never going to get rid of 80% of the population. It's not going to happen. We're not going to have that sort of debilitating war. Um, so, yeah, I mean, the population dynamics and all that, maybe they will naturally go down to a more manageable area, a more manageable amount, which would be, the order of 7 or 8 million. I think that that's a more realistic amount that Ukraine can support without relying on other countries. And I think they have to get to a situation where they're not reliant on other countries. The natural resources aren't there. So I don't know what they're going to do. Um, I mean, you can only have Ukrainian brides for so much. And I don't know how much that actually generates for the country. It's, yeah, that's going to be the difficulty is rebuilding this country after this. And I think realistically, whoever convinced Volodymyr Zelensky to do anything other than surrender straight away. they were doing a disservice to Ukraine. And I think that Ukraine and Zelensky made a major mistake in not surrendering immediately in 2022. 2022, there you go, 2022. Yeah, they should have surrendered straight away. And that would have been better for everybody. Better for them, better for Russia, better for the whole world. I think the only country that's better off for them to continue to fight has been China. So this war has been supporting China at the expense of everyone else, including us here in Australia. It's hurt us a lot. Cost of living crisis, and we're all a lot poorer. And so the sooner they surrender now, the better. And the deal that Trump can give to Zelensky, and what he should give, is Zelensky, we'll give you a safe passage in USA and we'll protect you. You will not be assassinated. Yeah. That's all I'm going to say today. So there you go. Bye bye now.